Welcome to If Prices Could Talk, the podcast where we dive into the art and science of pricing, sales, and negotiation. I'm your host, Tracy Dent. Join me as we explore strategies and current events shaping the future of pricing power in B2B, featuring insights from industry leaders and subject matter experts. Let's jump into today's conversation. All right, Melissa, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me. I was very excited to get to chat with you guys today.
Yeah, we're psyched to have you. So Melissa is the CEO of Pipeline Entrepreneurial Fellowship. Pete and Adnan from our end have done work with Pipeline over the last, I would say, 2 years, right? In different capacities. So we thought it would be good to do this kind of roundtable style and talk about startups, entrepreneurs, some of the challenges they face. And perhaps our best starting point is to just have you, Melissa, tell us a little bit about, for the people listening, can you talk about Pipeline, what you do, a little bit about your sweet spot in working with these founders?
Yeah, thanks so much. And I have to give a huge shout out to Pete and Adnan because they have been incredible parts of our programming over the last 2 years. And this year, we're actually bringing them both in at one of our modules. So very excited for 2025. So Pipeline is a fellowship program for serial high growth entrepreneurs in the Midwest. And I think everyone has a different definition of the Midwest. Ours is Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri. And we focus solely on serial entrepreneurs because one of the things that makes us unique is we do not take equity in the companies that we serve. So I want someone who succeed or fail, it's ride or not the horse. I want that entrepreneur who is going to, if they fail, get right back up, start another company, create jobs, drive revenue. And if they succeed, they're not going to go retire. They're going to start another company, create jobs, drive revenue. So I really think of us as, even though we are a nonprofit, I think of us as an economic development play. We are constantly helping to support, provide resources and programming for the top entrepreneurs in the Midwest with the goal of keeping them here in the Midwest so they don't have to leave to go to the coasts. So we have our traditional fellowship program, which is a year-long program, 4 modules a year. After that, you become a member. Membership is for life. And then in 2022, we started a new program for earlier stage entrepreneurs who also identifies from being from an underrepresented group. And that is for people who are not yet full-time on their startup. So earlier stage, year-long program. The goal of that is to get through we call it Pathfinder, our Pathfinder program, which gets you into the fellowship. Fellowship leads to membership, memberships for life. So basically, I like to say I have the whole entire continuum of care for serial entrepreneurs.
How did you get connected to become the CEO? How did you come into the organization?
So my background had been as an entrepreneur. So I had been a partner in a number of companies. 2 of those were successfully sold. And then after that, I started my own companies. And then was recruited in end of 2019 for the role of CEO to take over from the original founder of Pipeline, who was retiring. And I had never heard of Pipeline. And so I looked up the website and just felt like it was such an incredible opportunity because as a serial entrepreneur myself, it is a different mindset. And so I felt like it was a really great opportunity to branch into the nonprofit space, which is a completely different world than anything I had been involved with from a business perspective. And so over the last 5 years, we've really grown the organization, evolved the organization, gone after all kinds of different grants. We just have taken a lot of like the business perspectives that I had previously and try to apply them to a nonprofit. So how do we diversify our revenue streams? Do we have the right business model? All kinds of interesting things that I wouldn't have guessed would be something you'd be working on in a nonprofit, but we're very innovative. So it's been great.
It must be a really cool view of all these companies. It seemed like, as I was reading more about just some of the things that you've published lately, a lot of the companies are like already successful. You've got people that are off the ground. So what are some of these people dealing with? It feels to me like the challenges that these people would be facing as founders, as entrepreneurs, are different than they have been even a year ago, 2 years ago. So I think from all of your perspectives, what are the things that you see that people are kind of up against, and how are they facing that? How are you supporting them?
When I think about current times and what's changed is just general volatility and limited ability to predict what's going to happen in the future. Obviously, inflation has been a pretty hot topic across the board, and then pricing without a doubt comes into play when you start to think about inflation in terms of just kind of getting some level of exposure to some of the folks within Pipeline. The piece that really stood out to me was these founders, and anybody who's been a founder can certainly kind of appreciate the fact that there's just thousands of things that you have to go in and worry about as you're getting a business off the ground. With the first one being, what is it that we're going to sell? Whether that's kind of that product, service development, and then how are you going to go get in the marketplace? Point being that the price you're going to sell it at, you can go in there and make somewhat of an educated guess, but say the pricing science and the pricing theory isn't necessarily top of mind for all the right reasons. And then Tracy, getting back to your original question, what I see is like that tends to be of heightening importance just because of that level of volatility and unpredictability. And then even like for a founder, when they're going out and positioning their company in the marketplace, not knowing something as simple of what is my cost structure going to look at 6 months from now, and that could viably change in a pretty short amount of time. And then what impact could that have on my pricing structure? What are some of the considerations that I have to take into account to make sure that my company is kind of future proof, which is just incredibly important for companies at these really, really early stages when cash flow may not necessarily be there.
I think I'll add on. I think I agree with that add on. And then I think maybe not so much on the uncertainty side, just the reality of where technology is today, how fast it's changing. That can be both an advantage and something to worry about. It's kind of like you can start a business with an idea and have all these tools to help you get there really quickly. But I think what remains constant is that the individual and their conviction and their hard work and all of those things still are the requirement at the baseline foundational level to make sure a business succeeds or gets to the point where they're thinking through all these tough problems, because ultimately you still have to prioritize, okay, well, how much is this going to help me versus hurt me? And technology can really just be a rabbit hole of, they're sort of the crawl, walk, run of everything we think about when we're implementing, a go-to-market capability building project or a pricing project. And I think the same thing applies for an entrepreneur of, all right, well, do I need to be at full speed on day one with every aspect of my business? No. So really just thinking through and constantly prioritizing is probably kind of the oldest skill set that remains true today. But I think just what they're thinking about probably changes.
And I will add to that. I think you're both completely accurate. And I think for us as an organization, kind of under that lens, is that, one of the reasons why it was so important for us to start the Pathfinder program was we were seeing all of these later stage companies. Tracy, to your point, typically someone who's going through the fellowship program is somewhere around $1 million in revenue plus. And so we're really working on scale, not traction. And so when we started the Pathfinder program, that was really about, okay, how do I get traction? How do I have a company, I have it started, I'm not just idea phase, but how do I really get traction? And so those critical conversations that Pete and Adnan were able to have with them about pricing and strategy and those pieces are so critical, because if you don't have that solved, you're not going to be able to scale. And so the programming for us of Pathfinder was so critical, because we felt like, especially with serial entrepreneurs, that even if the company that they were running currently didn't succeed, those lessons as a serial entrepreneur are only going to help them with the next company. So that failure is going to turn into insight, knowledge that's going to help them take that next company further, faster. And so that was kind of that advantage that we were wanting to provide for Pathfinders, which is you're starting earlier, you're hopefully making less mistakes, you're starting with a better strategy. And in addition to that, Pipeline's been around since 2007. And so what you have is over 230 people who have gone through the program, many of whom have successfully sold companies or at least scaled them. And so that brain trust, being able to answer questions, mentor, and apply to earlier stage entrepreneurs, whether that's our fellows or our Pathfinders, all that does is help you not make mistakes. It helps you have that insight and that strategy that most people don't have when they're starting a company, because it is a very lonely spot starting a company on your own. So all of those resources really come into play. And then we bring in really the best of the best when it comes to how do you understand sales? How do you understand business models? How do we do all those things and teach that in a way that it isn't just a typical, it's not a P&L, it's not understanding that. It's literally, for us, it's how do you tell your story through your financials? So it's really kind of taking everything and putting it into action in a tangible way through these modules that are hopefully helping them you know, kind of to what both Pete and Adnan were saying, not make some of those mistakes, being able to have that advantage instead of a disadvantage when they're trying to scale their companies.
So as you guys are leading these sessions, can you walk the people listening through an example of either something that was, we just do like some aha moments of people either through the lens of value or understanding their pricing or something, you know, when you're at this stage as a startup, as a founder, what are some of the things that you have seen people experience, see with fresh eyes that can help them kind of get on that next trajectory of growing the company?
I'll start. Yeah, so many examples. And I think just to frame it for the audience, you know, kind of in some of these workshops, we'll approach things, you know, pricing is sort of like an iceberg where what you see as a price is kind of what's above the waterline, but underneath it, it's your whole value proposition. It is what is the product? It is how do you organize that product and sell it from like your good, better, and best to different customer types that, you know, want the best version versus just like a baseline brass tacks version. So all that's happening behind the scenes, and we kind of walk folks through that whole journey to arrive at their price. And I think one of my favorite parts is when we do sort of a, you know, a value driver brainstorm, like, hey, what is it that your product does for your end customers? And usually folks are like, well, we have these different features and we can change it for different customers. And here's kind of how I've thought about it. And, you know, maybe it's sort of a software service that solves a very specific problem, or maybe it's just a cleaning service that's going to reach a new geographic area that does not have this type of kind of online scheduler that exists. And then they often think first about, okay, well, features of the product that I've developed are what are the value drivers. But really, we like to think about value as, okay, well, for your end customers, how do you help them grow their revenue or reduce their expenses or mitigate some risk? And that's very much a B2B sort of lens, but and then in B2C, there could be things like time savings and efficiency and all that sort of thing. And so when we give them that framework and then they have kind of a brainstorm and they kind of they do their homework overnight and they kind of think about that the next day and they're presenting it. The best part is when you have like a room full of 20 people and someone's stuck and you just have everyone else putting up their hands. You're like, no, you do like 10 more things for your customers than you thought you did. And you get everyone else like telling the founder how great their business is. And they didn't quite see it because you kind of have, you know, it's hard to read the label from inside the bottle sometimes. And you get all these other people that are kind of chiming in and helping you. So I think those are the most exciting things and all these aha moments that then, you know, you're like, well, if you're doing all this for your customers, you're worth something to them. And now when we talk about pricing, it's going to make a lot more sense, or you should charge what you're worth and not just sort of thinking, be afraid of price, be proud of your price.
You know, for those that don't know, Pete and I did completely separate sessions, but I had a almost the exact same feeling as Pete just described in the session that I did. One of the big reasons I enjoyed pricing in general, and this particularly resonated with the audience at Pipeline, was going in and helping them really truly understand the value that they are bringing to their customers beyond that features set that Pete was referencing. And kind of the art part behind pricing is very much going in and truly getting a sense of the value that you are bringing to the table with your customers. And also from the perspective of founders, it's almost instilling that confidence in them to say that we are truly adding some really significant value as a result of the services that we offer. And your price and the story that goes along with your company should be communicated in such a way that truly reflects that value. In order to do that, you have to put a lot of thought into how it is impacting any individual customer, how that value might vary by customer segment, stages of growth, geography, whatever kind of nuances in the different attributes of your customer product might be, but just almost starting at the very highest level to say, how are we driving any value to the end customer, and then getting a sense of how that value might vary, and then building that price model, price structure, and not being afraid to price in such a way that is truly reflective of that value. So that was kind of one of the coolest parts. And then just like the passion and then the brainstorming exercises that came about with, say, these founders engaging with their peers, all coming from really, really different businesses, but sharing that commonality of coming together with the structure it was absolutely incredible.
I have to say that's probably one of my favorite parts that you just mentioned, Adnan, is the fact that it's industry agnostic. And so one of the things that I think is so valuable is when you have someone who, let's say, is in bio and they're talking to someone who's in fintech, ag, or whatever, we get so focused that you can't see the forest for the trees. And so when you bring in people who are from other industries, and we're all, as serial entrepreneurs, great problem solvers, but we just get so focused on our piece. And so when you bring in a cohort together, you have all of these other perspectives. And when they see value, to both of your points, then you start to have that confidence. And you've both done such an incredible job of starting with them. Hey, let's, what is that value? Because you're right, especially the earlier you are, the easier it is to see it as, well, it's this feature, it's that. And it is so much of your story and how you tell it. And so I love that you both picked up on different, very important pieces of that puzzle, and also how important that cohort is, that group mentality of really pulling out the best in each other, and that safe space to be able to all be learning together, and having that willingness to say, oh, but have you thought of it this way? And it's those moments, to Tracy, to your point, like, what are my favorite parts? It's those aha moments that happen when someone in a completely different industry is like, oh, well, have you thought of it this way? And that's like that one little piece that like solves the puzzle. And it's from someone who's not even in that industry. It's just, you see it from a different perspective. And when you put all those really incredible minds together, and you have people like Pete and Adnan who are leading them, it's just magic. I mean, what comes out of that is really, from a business perspective, it could be game changing for them. So, and then you just keep layering on module after module, year after year on that, and you can see how it enables them to really scale faster.
Have you guys seen unconventional strategies work out? Because I would think, to your point, that some of these CEOs and founders would have a bit more appetite for risk or pivoting. Like when you're starting a company, you see a need or you see something that you think will make a difference. And then as it grows, you're either finding out new insights about the value it provides, or see kind of like a new possible trajectory as technology evolves. Have you seen people kind of take a risk on an unconventional strategy that worked out well?
There's so many where people took an unconventional strategy, but I think what allowed them to do it was that it's like, you'll see them come into the module with an idea of like, I think I should try this. And you can always tell, because they'll say something like, and I was thinking about testing out this idea, and I thought I'd bring it to the module. And what they're really doing is, they know that they need to make this switch, but they need the validation. If you get that validation, then you're like taking that right back to your team. This is what we're doing. And I talked about it and I got all this feedback, and this is right. I love that it's a safe place for them to come in and test ideas, whether it's sales, whether it's business models, whatever it is, being able to come in and test that theory out. And that's the best place to learn right there.
I would imagine that for any of these founders that are going through the program, it's never going to be a straight path. It's not, you're going, this is what you're doing, you're just kind of going this way. It's a left turn, a right turn. You're kind of taking two steps back to take one step forward in many different cases, and that's kind of a natural part of it. And when it comes to pricing strategy and getting back to kind of the value drivers and the basis of that, what I often see comes to mind, and I think this resonated in the pipeline programs as well, was when we're going through this exercise of how really are you bringing value to their customers, the light bulbs tend to go off to say, okay, we think that we are saving our customers time because we have the ability to, I'm kind of making this up, but to help our customers process for a return from something that they bought online, right? There's a service that using to return things, it saves them time. But then also there's these kind of ancillary value drivers that come into play, meaning that in that type of a scenario, people have this kind of pile of returns that for whatever reason are stacking up in their corner. And then you see those things and it's like almost frustration and embarrassment that comes into play, which is beyond the time savings. Point being that as a result of being in that environment where that conversation is being facilitated, a lot of their peers are there. That's a great mechanism for people to just kind of work with each other to say, you know what, I originally thought my business was doing X, Y, and Z and providing value in one way, but we've now had the conversations beyond features, and now we've identified these ancillary value drivers that could potentially even become primary value drivers, and that's the basis of my strategy going forward. So all those pivots, I think, certainly come into play for the business broadly, but also just kind of flow down into pricing strategy.
Are there common pitfalls or like we see the same kind of wall at this specific stage of a company. Are there things that you see that you're like, oh yes, this is something that we see often. A lot of founders deal with this at this point in time, and here's kind of how we support them through that.
I won't speak for pipeline companies necessarily because we're seeing sort of a snapshot in time. So I don't know that we don't necessarily get the benefit of the same evolution. But I'm thinking that oftentimes, like from a pricing perspective, founders, CEOs of small companies, they're really in charge of pricing. So they're kind of thinking, okay, we need to set a price. We have a new thing in the market. Kind of the classic error is that they're like, oh, well, we got to get some traction. I need some volume. I need to get the message out. They set a low price to try to get people to buy in, make it easy to clear that adoption hurdle. But that's often a mistake because it doesn't necessarily mean that the product is going to be a fit for more people. It's just sort of the people that want it or are likely to early adopt it sort of develop this anchor of, oh, it's actually a very affordable, but it's really cheap. And maybe that does a couple things. One is the people that value it most end up paying, like getting the most surplus and not rewarding you for the hard work you put in, and you're not really testing around it. It's also really hard to then change that perception over time. And then sort of where do you go from there? Instead of you usually create the Cadillac, the first version out the door, and then if you're going to kind of create the more basic version of whatever that is, and you've already kind of priced it low, you're sort of out of options. So then, how do you move your existing customer base to something that is more in line with the value rather than just trying to think about, okay, well, how do I price it right up front for the ideal customer profile, and then think about other use cases to maybe price it down over time.
Yeah, I like that. I think for us, I think a lot of times what we see is, and I'll speak more on the fellow side just because we have years of experience on that, but they're a little bit further along. And a lot of times you see them kind of get stuck where it's like they've been growing, and they hit this plateau. And so a lot of times what we're able to do is help them kind of figure out where's that plateau coming from. And then, how do we get past it? And a lot of times that it's a pricing piece, it's a value piece, it's a, what else has changed in the market. And so I think for our Pathfinders, you're so early on, it is a lot of those just kind of aha moments around pricing and value and those things. And then as you're scaling, it is that inevitable plateau that you hit. And for us, it's really helping them uncover why, and then how do we get past it? And, while this part isn't on pricing, some of one of the things that I love the most about our third module for our fellows is it's all about their financials. And, I shared earlier, it's telling their story through their financials. And inevitably, you're taking people who've been running companies for, they're doing great. They're, in the millions in revenue. And you put them in a financial module and they all are terrified. Like they'll all say on the first day, I'm not looking forward to this module. This is going to be terrible. Even if you understand your financials, feeling like they're going to be up on a screen and everyone's going to be talking about them is still terrifying.
Yeah.
And so, especially when you're, one of the things I would say that's going on right now is there's, a lot of changes on the investment landscape, especially we have a lot of digital health companies. There's a lot of pullback around digital health. And so that's something that's come up a lot. And there's this fear factor again, when you're talking about your financials. And I think part of it is most people who are founders haven't been on the other side of the table to know what an investor is looking at with their financials. So it feels very ominous of, I don't know what they're looking at. And the woman who leads that module, her name's Laura Kilcrease, and she's credited with starting the tech scene in Austin. She's just a powerhouse, incredible woman. She will say to them, and it's up on the screen, she'll just go, oh, well, I can see by this that, your recurring revenue is, and she's just going just basically tells the entire company story without them ever sharing anything other than their financials. And she's just like, I can see there's this. And then that is really terrifying. But then once you actually understand what your financials tell from a story perspective, then she digs in with them to help them understand, okay, there is an issue here. How do we fix it? And that's kind of that plateau part. And that's why I love that module so much because, okay, why are those numbers plateauing? What's going on? This is what I see as an investor when I'm looking at your numbers. How do we adjust? What do we need to do? What's really going on? So you really start to get into this like kind of diagnosis of what might be going on because she's looking at their financials. And so it's always fascinating to me. It's one of the modules I love to sit in on because the terror that you see when their financials are up and it's like, oh, I can tell you this, this, this. And then it's like, oh my gosh, you can see all that. Yeah. Yeah. And so it's like until you understand what people see when they look at your financials, which they're all going to ask for, whether you're, looking for investment or whatever it is,
Right.
you're really flying blind. And so it's such a valuable exercise that by the end of it, everyone's like, this was my favorite, even though they're terrified, to start with. So
That is
Right.
really interesting, just in terms of like the phases of growth that come into play. And the way I think about that when it comes to pricing is initially the question is, okay, I have product or service X, Y, and Z. What should the price point be? But then as companies mature and, like you said, perhaps hit a plateau, one of the things that we often encounter is you're offering your clients a lot of value in this realm. Can you potentially make a slight pivot within your product to add incremental value over the time, and that can help dictate kind of that future strategy. So not necessarily like exactly a direct, hey, how much should I charge for X, Y, and Z?
yeah.
But the commonality is that now we are putting our minds in that in the mindset of understanding value. How can I take what I'm doing right now, add incremental value to the existing base that I have, so I can get to that next phase of growth for my company?
Mm.
And that's so like I love that because that you have data, right? So when our early Pathfinders, there's no data to really look at, right? But when you've been doing this for a while and you have, your financials and you have this data to look at, you can start to see, okay, well, this is growing, what's going on here? And you start to be able to use that to diagnose and look at, okay, well, maybe to your point, maybe there's a pivot here, or maybe there's some, value that we're not capturing. So I love that. That's exactly what you're really doing.
From your perspective, Melissa, just having been in this for years and witnessed a lot of conversations and people helping each other, what are some of the best pieces of advice that you've seen, either them with each other or through some of the people that have come into the leading the sessions?
One of my favorite pieces of advice, and I think it's helpful whether it's life or in business, is I see a lot of founders who, you know, a lot of serial entrepreneurs are very type A, and it's difficult when you make a mistake. I mean, there's going to be setbacks, there's going to be failures. I mean, try very much to lean into the fact that you're a serial entrepreneur. This might not be your company. We're not, it's what you learn from it and what you're going to take to the next. But you see a lot of just guilt or like not being able to get past, like, oh, I trust this person. There was a business deal that went wrong, or I did this and it didn't work out. And so there's this quote that I always say to people, which is, you made the decisions that you made at the time with the information you had then. Now that you have better information, you can make better decisions. It's like you have to be able to like stop the bleed, where it's like you're just mentally going back over and over. If like, if it's a bad business deal, why did I trust that person? I had this, and it's always like, hey, did you think that was a dumb decision at the time? No? Okay. Then why now you have better information. You recognize that wasn't the best decision, but you didn't have that information then. And somehow there is like being able to let that go is such a key element because you're going to make mistakes. And if you hold on to that failure and you can't get past it because you're trying to figure out how did that happen, it's like you're going to make other mistakes and you're going to have to tell yourself this again. And so for me, that piece of like, let it go. You made it at the time. You have better information now. Make better decisions with that information. It's just this kind of mental process. And I've used it time and time and time again because we do. Sometimes it's a co-founder that the relationship doesn't work out. And it's like, oh, how did I not see this? It's like, again, you didn't see it at the time. No one could have. It's okay. Let it go. Use the information that you have now. Make better decisions.
Piece of advice. All right, that's good. Because of our time, maybe we pause there. Last bit from you, Melissa. If people either want to get involved, people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to learn more?
Our application season, we are switching it to be always open, but we actually
Nice.
don't actually do the actual interview process. We just wrapped that. And so that starts fall of 2025. We'll start to review applications again, go through the whole interview process. And then that kicks off in January of the following year. So we're just about to kick off our first module next month. And yeah, so that's really the easiest way to kind of think about our seasons, is that it's the fall, just like school, and then we start in a January cycle. And then for anyone that wants to reach out, it's the longest, URL ever. It's pipelineentrepreneurs.com, but you can check out our website or find me on LinkedIn. I'm Melissa Vincent. And always you can email us as well at info@pipelineentrepreneurs.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for coming on. It was great to have you on. Great to
Aw.
chat and hear about some of your experiences together. And I really appreciate you spending the time with us.
Oh, thank you so much. It was so great to get to see you guys. And I'm looking forward to seeing you at Module 2, both of you.
Likewise.
All right.
Awesome. Thanks,
Good
Melissa.
stuff.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.